Greetings, one and all, and welcome to another episode of Time Traveler, the 1930s. Today, we have one of my very favorite actors of all time, talented, extremely attractive, and just all-around perfect performer. Today's guest is Cary Grant. First of all, I want to say to the naysayers and trolls, I did my best. I thought I would be able to make him look exactly like the picture I have in my mind of Cary Grant, which is very clear, but Sims 4 just really stumped me this time, and I think if you see him in passing, in action, he might look like Cary Grant, but he doesn't nearly capture the chiseled good looks. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into his fabulous story. Born Archibald Alec Leach on January 18, 1904, a resident of Horfield, a suburb of Bristol, England. He was the second child of Elias James Leach, a tailor at a clothing factory, and Elsie Maria Kingdon, a seamstress. Their first child, John William Elias Leach, born in 1899, died of tuberculous meningitis just one day before his first birthday. This was just the beginning of tragedy in the Leach family. Archibald's childhood was miserable, with an alcoholic father and a mother who suffered from severe depression. Although she struggled in her own life, his mother taught him to sing and dance from a young age. When she was able to, she took her son to the cinema to see silent film stars such as Charlie Chaplin and Fatty Arbuckle grace the screen with their comedic timing, something that would become very important later on in his life. It was mentioned in Grant's biography that his mother was not able to give or receive affection, in part due to her guilt over the death of her first son. She feared losing Grant, so she never created a bond with him. This dynamic would create a negative relationship between Grant and his mother, which he later cites as one of the reasons he did not have positive experiences with women. At the age of 9, Archibald's father committed his mother to Glenside Hospital, a mental institution. He told his son that she had gone away on a long holiday. This further made Archie resent his mother, believing that she had simply abandoned him. His father later reported that she had died. Archie moved in with his grandmother in Bristol and sat by as his father remarried and started a new family, seemingly discarding him. It was not until Archibald's 31st birthday that he found out the truth. His mother had been alive the entire time. He was told this by his father as he lay on his deathbed. Grant immediately made arrangements for his mother to be taken out of the institution in June of 1935. In October of 1938, after completing work on the set of one of his films, he went to visit his mother. Mr. Leach had an affinity for the theater. He particularly loved acrobatic dancers that he had seen throughout his childhood, called the Bob Pender Stage Troupe. He trained as a stilt walker and began performing and touring with them. In 1915, at age 11, Archie received a scholarship to attend the Fairfield Grammar School in Bristol. His father could barely afford for him to purchase the uniform, but once he began classes, he proved himself a good student. He also excelled at sports and used his acrobatic talents to his advantage. In the evenings, Archie would spend his time working in Bristol theaters as a stagehand. At the age of 13, he was doing lighting for various shows, and he later volunteered as a messenger and guide during the summer at the military docks. His time near the sea in Southampton gave him a fever for travel. He attempted to sign on as a cabin boy on a ship, but he was much too young for such a position and was turned down. At the age of 14, on March 13, 1918, Archibald was expelled from Fairfield Grammar School. There was much speculation about how he got expelled, but the most likely was that he did something deliberately to get himself free from school so that he could pursue his entertainment career. He immediately rejoined Pender's troupe after leaving school. At the same time that this was happening, Archie's father had acquired a better job in Southampton, coincidentally, and he moved there. Authorities came to his door questioning him about his residence away from his son in Bristol. Prompted by the police to rectify the situation with his son, he co-signed a contract with Archie and Pender, negotiating a weekly salary and room and board for him as he completed a 3-year tour. He toured the United States with the Pender troupe and became very good at pantomime, using physical acting techniques. At age 16 in 1920, Archibald spent a week on the RMS Olympic performing with the troupe. While on the ship, he met Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, who were there honeymooning. It is said that Grant played shuffleboard with Fairbanks, and the two hit it off. Fairbanks became a role model to young Archie. They arrived in New York and performed in the New York Hippodrome, which at the time was the largest theater in the world, with seating for 5,697 people. Their stint there lasted 9 months, with the troupe doing 12 shows a week. Archibald moved on to the vaudeville stage next, modeling some of his comedy after the Marx Brothers. He joined a group called the Knockabout Comedians and performed on Broadway. Later in the summer of 1922, he formed another group with former members of the Pender troupe and enjoyed great success, always honing his comedic timing. He first visited Los Angeles in 1924 with a group called the Walking Stanleys, and he was very impressed with life in California. He returned to New York to work as a unicycle rider. They called him Rubber Legs and continued to develop his unique brand of physical comedy. He formed yet another vaudevillian group, the Jack Janis Company, and began touring again. His English accent had mutated due to his travels, and he began speaking with his signature transatlantic or mid-Atlantic, whichever you prefer, accent. Archie was cast as an Australian character in Reggie Hammerstein's Golden Dawn in 1927 and earned $75 a week. The show did not do very well, but Grant received some positive reviews for his performance as the competent young newcomer. This led him to join the William Morris Agency. He ended up in another Reggie Hammerstein show called Polly, but yet again, the show was unsuccessful. At this point, Florence Ziegfeld made a bid for a contract with Archie. But Hammerstein sold his contract to the Schubert brothers. Shortly after his 25th birthday, he appeared in a French comedy that ran for 72 performances and earned Grant $350 per week. In 1927, Archibald moved to Detroit and then to Chicago and bought himself a luxury automobile. He also decided to visit his half-brother, Eric, in England just before a return to the New York stage to play Max Grunwald in A Wonderful Night, a Schubert production. It premiered 2 days before the Wall Street stock market crash of 1929, on October 31st. It ran through February of 1930 with 125 performances. It received mixed reviews. Archie had a great deal of trouble communicating with women and making any connections. He poured himself into his work and returned to touring instead. In 1930, he spent 9 months on the road with a musical called The Street Singer, followed by a summer in St. Louis during which he appeared in a dozen productions and a total of 87 shows. This brought him some serious publicity and a growing reputation as a romantic lead. He openly admitted that he had, quote, a great need to be liked and admired, unquote. He was fired by the Schubert brothers because he refused to accept pay cuts caused by the Great Depression. But he wasn't out of work for very long. He was noticed by William B. Friedlander, a Broadway composer and songwriter, and put into a production called Nicky, opposite Fay Wray in September of 1931. Although successful, it was short-lived due to further effects of the Great Depression and a lack of funds. Archibald's film career began the same year when Ed Sullivan praised his role in Nicky, saying that he had a big future in movies. This review was his ticket to a screen test with Paramount. He was exactly what they needed, and co-founder and general manager of Paramount, Gary Schulberg, signed 27-year-old Archie to a 5-year contract at $450 per week. Schulberg did require him to change his name to something that sounded all-American. They arrived at the name Cary Grant. Grant and his team set out to make him the epitome of masculine glamour. He appeared in some minor roles in 1931, and in 1932, he made his feature film debut in This Is the Night. In the same year, he played a wealthy playboy opposite Marlene Dietrich in Blonde Venus. Grant argued with the director of the film in German various times, not over the film, but simply because he didn't like him. Despite this conflict, Grant went on to play several playboy roles in his career. He starred in a handful of pictures with Frederick March, Sylvia Sidney, Gary Cooper, Charles Laughton, Tallulah Bankhead, Nancy Carroll, and Randolph Scott. This handful of films did not launch his career, but served to catch the public's eye. In 1933, he appeared opposite Mae West in She Done Him Wrong. After Grant became a full-blown star, West was fond of telling people that she discovered Grant. Their film together was a box office hit and earned $2 million in the United States. Grant received a raise from $450 a week to $750 per week. The film did so well that it saved a post-Depression Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy. Grant married actress Virginia Sherrill in 1934 and made a string of films that did not earn money. This, combined with the press reporting on Grant's failing marriage to Sherrill, made Paramount decide that, well, they didn't need him, and Grant agreed that he did not need to renew his contract. In late 1935, Grant caught a break at RKO Radio Pictures when producer Pandora Berman took him on at the request of Katharine Hepburn. He made Sylvia Scarlett for them, and although it failed commercially, the critics loved it. He made one more picture for Paramount, Wedding Present, before his contract officially ended. He decided to freelance a bit, as well as divorce Virginia. They were married for just 1 year. During his freelancing career, he made a film that was shot in England called The Amazing Quest of Ernest Bliss in 1936. It bombed and made Grant think twice about venturing out on his own. Later that year, he made Susie in a cast with Jean Harlow and Franchot Tone. This was a stepping stone to a joint contract signing between RKO and Columbia. This gave him stability and more freedom to choose the roles that made him comfortable. His first film with Columbia earned him $50,000 and was called When You're in Love. The critics loved how he played the role of an American artist, winning over a famous opera singer. For RKO, he made The Toast of New York, which failed at the box office. But he was then loaned to MGM to make Topper. With his comedy background, this film was right up his alley and became a huge success. Next came what film critic Benjamin Schwartz called the most spectacular run ever for an actor in American pictures. That film was The Awful Truth. In it, he mocked the director's mannerisms, which caused the director to dislike Grant. But because he was so talented, director Leo McCarey told Grant that he could improvise and make use of his vaudeville skills throughout the picture. It worked like magic. Next, in 1938, came Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn, a personal favorite of mine. It was another screwball comedy with physical humor galore, which earned rave reviews from audiences and critics alike. Later the same year, he starred opposite Hepburn again, this time in Holiday. It was a commercial failure and did so poorly that Hepburn was deemed box office poison. Even after a commercial failure, or several, Grant was at his peak of popularity. In 1939, he attempted some more serious roles with an undertone of humor and did very well for himself in Gunga Din and Only Angels Have Wings. In 1940, Grant appeared with Rosalind Russell in His Girl Friday, another favorite of mine. They played ex-spouses and had chemistry that was undeniable on set. Their witty banter and timing made the film an absolute pleasure to watch. In My Favorite Wife, RKO made the second biggest picture of the year, and according to Life magazine, a first-rate comedy. Grant was in his element and dazzled audiences. He had a couple of mediocre films in the same year, but those were followed by the final film of 1940, The Philadelphia Story. He played the ex-husband of Hepburn's character, and Grant felt that he gave one of the strongest performances of his career. So he was crushed when, he did not receive an Oscar nomination. Both of his co-stars, Katharine Hepburn and James Stewart, received nominations to add salt to the wound. Grant was nominated for an Academy Award for Penny Serenade. It was an emotional film for Grant because it explored the life of a married couple with a child trying to keep their marriage thriving. At this time in Grant's personal life, he was engaged to Barbara Woolworth Hutton, and they had been discussing the possibility of having children. It was an important moment in Cary Grant's life. After all was said and done, however, their marriage would only last 3 years and did not produce any children. In 1941, Grant starred in his first of 4 films with director Alfred Hitchcock, Suspicion. He did an amazing job at appearing sinister, but still completely charming, despite never warming up to his co-star Joan Fontaine. In 1942, Grant went on a 3-week tour of the United States to serve the war effort. He visited soldiers in the hospital and even took part in a short propaganda film called Road to Victory with fellow celebrities. Grant was now 38 and next made The Talk of the Town in 1942, as well as Upon a Honeymoon and Mr. Lucky. The following year, in 1943, he shot Destination Tokyo in just 6 weeks, which left him exhausted. However, Newsweek announced that it was the finest performance of his career. In 1944, Grant starred in Frank Capra's Arsenic and Old Lace, and later said that he felt it was the worst performance of his career. He later received a second Oscar for None But the Lonely, which was filmed in London and set in the Great Depression. He also expanded his work into radio, starring in CBS radio series Suspense. I love this series. I'm a big supporter of old-time radio. Love it, huge fan. Check it out if you can. I will provide some links in the description, as always. After World War II had ended, Grant had mixed results in his film choices. He made a cameo appearance in Without Reservations in 1946, and that same year he portrayed Cole Porter in Night and Day. Next, Grant worked with Ingrid Bergman and Claude Rains in another Hitchcock film, Notorious, which entered into the world of the American government investigating a Nazi organization in Brazil. It is ultimately a love story and the film which provided audiences with one of the longest kisses in film history. It lasted 2.5 minutes. Critics felt that his performance showed a maturity that he had acquired over the years, and they loved his sophistication in the role of an American agent. In 1947, he appeared with Myrna Loy and Shirley Temple in The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. His signature physical comedy and chemistry with Loy made this film one of the top grossing at the box office that year. Later that year, he worked with David Niven and Loretta Young in The Bishop's Wife. This film was also a major success and was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. In 1948, Grant appeared in Mr. Blanding's Builds His Dream House and Every Girl Should Be Married. He finished the year as the 4th most popular star at the box office. The following year, Grant appeared in drag in I Was a Male War Bride. Unfortunately, he fell ill during filming with hepatitis and lost a great deal of weight, which is noticeable in the film. It was quite successful and helped put him on the highest paid Hollywood actors list, as he was making $300,000 per film. He married American actress Betsy Drake in 1949 and stayed with her for better or for worse until 1958. They divorced in 1962. There are several accounts of Grant being unable to reciprocate affection and of his lack of communication skills. We can only speculate that it contributed to his failed relationships. As the 1950s began, Grant found himself in a bit of a slump. He made a series of films that did not do as well as expected, and he was becoming sick of his own Cary Grant persona of success and wealth. He was fond of saying that to play yourself, your true self, is the hardest thing in the world. His 20-year career as Cary Grant was beginning to get old for him. At age 49, Grant was offered a role in A Star is Born, but turned it down, believing his film career was coming to an end. It was not. In 1955, Grant starred alongside Grace Kelly in To Catch a Thief and said that he found it a very enjoyable experience. Hitchcock was once again the director, and Grant found that he and his co-star behaved very professionally. He later said that Grace Kelly may have been the finest actress that he ever worked with. He found a way to negotiate a cut of the total profits of the film. He would get 10%, which for this film came to $700,000. Hitchcock received only $50,000 for directing and producing. In 1957, Grant made An Affair to Remember with Deborah Kerr and The Pride and the Passion with Sophia Loren, with whom he had a very steamy affair. He wooed Sophia on set, and there were many rumors that he was obsessed with her and that he proposed to her while on set. Sophia Loren has said many times that he never proposed, but that they had a lovely relationship. She was 23 at the time and claims not to have fully understood love, especially with a man 30 years her senior. Frank Sinatra also appeared in this film and was said to be, interestingly enough, irritating to his co-stars. Houseboat was his next film, and he was cast opposite Sophia Loren again. It is said that he expressed anger at this choice, but the cast and crew of the film can attest to the fact that the sexual tension between Grant and Loren was so intense that it was difficult to film their scenes. Grant was reunited with Ingrid Bergman in Indiscreet in 1958 and grew a genuine friendship with the actress. Their connection made the film one of the best romantic comedies of the era and one of Grant's personal favorites. Grant received the first of 5 Golden Globes for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy. In 1959, Grant made his next Hitchcock film, North by Northwest, which is now listed as one of the greatest films of all time. I have to say that I agree. Cary Grant's highest-grossing film at $9.5 million was Operation Petticoat, co-starring with Tony Curtis. His calm reaction to the film gags really drove home his talent with comedic timing and pulled laughter from the audiences. The second grossing film of his career came next. It was A Touch of Mink with Doris Day. It received a Golden Globe for Best Comedy Picture as well. Producers Broccoli and Saltzman had an eye on Cary to play James Bond in the 1962 film Dr. No, but scratched the idea when Grant would not commit to the franchise of Bond films. In 1963, he co-starred with Audrey Hepburn in Charade. He found working with her to be wonderful, and they play a believable team of flirtatious longtime partners. He was concerned about his age, making him look like a cradle robber, but they charmed audiences together. It was a delightful film that is timeless in its appeal. Grant changed his screen image in 1964 for the film Father Goose. He played a disheveled beachcomber and still found a way to dazzle his audience. His final film was Walk, Don't Run in 1966, one last comedy shot on location in Tokyo. He was tired and ready to move on, turning down a new offer from Hitchcock to star in Torn Curtain. Cary Grant's retirement began in 1966. He was 62 years old and had been performing for most of his life. Age 62 is also when Grant had his first child, with his wife and American actress Diane Cannon. They were married from 1965 to 1968. Their daughter's name is Jennifer, and she also became an actress, most famously as part of the Beverly Hills 90210 cast. Grant doted on his daughter, going so far as to build a bank vault-like room in which to store keepsakes. Jennifer felt that this meticulously curated collection was a result of Grant's childhood artifacts being destroyed during World War II. He did not want his daughter to miss out on her memories. Directors made bids to lure Grant out of retirement throughout the 1970s, but he didn't budge. In the late 70s and early 80s, Grant suffered the death of several old friends and colleagues and began to feel that he would soon be next. He was tired and had had a full life, later being quoted as saying, "I'm going to quit it all next year. I'm going to lie in bed. I shall just close all doors, turn off the telephone, and enjoy my life." His biggest venture during this time was to become the director of MGM in 1975, later sitting on the board of directors of MGM Films and MGM Grand Hotels. In 1980, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art staged a 2-month exhibit looking back on Grant's life. In 1982, he was named Man of the Year by the New York Friars Club at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Friends began to notice that a serenity had come over Grant shortly after his 80th birthday in 1984. His health had not wavered until he had a mild stroke in October of that year. In his final years, he made some public appearances for film buffs that had followed his career and new film enthusiasts that had just discovered his film library. He happily admitted that it was a boost for his ego and was happy to be acknowledged once again. Grant married one final time, this time to Barbara Harris in 1981. He also took on a number of business ventures and had a knack for deal-making. He and his wife invested in real estate, developing areas that were previously unknown into tourist destinations. One such location was Acapulco, Mexico, now a thriving vacation spot for people looking for sun and sand. Grant had been friends with Howard Hughes and was shrewd in business long before he became a megastar. It was his head for business that made him wealthy by the end of the 1930s. His acting merely contributed to his fortune. Grant was preparing for an appearance in Conversations with Cary Grant at the Adler Theater in Davenport, Iowa, when he became very tired and ill. He stumbled in the auditorium and quickly made his way backstage. He was taken to the Black Hawk Hotel where he and his wife were staying. A doctor was called and ended up making the discovery that Grant had been having a major stroke. The doctor present and his wife were watching him die, deteriorating from an ongoing stroke every 15 minutes. Grant didn't want help. He accepted what was happening, and by 8:45 that evening, Grant had slipped into a coma and was later transported to St. Luke's Hospital, where he remained alive for an additional 45 minutes before succumbing to death at 11:22 p.m. at the age of 82. Thank you, Mr. Grant, for sharing your beautiful face and your intense personality. You have made me laugh many times, and I have been blessed by your films. There are a lot of sources that speculate about his private and serious personality, relationship issues, infidelity, etc. I have linked some of those sources in the description for you, but I won't really cover those topics here. As always, this is a celebration of achievement. Grant left quite a legacy and has been honored in various locations with statues, plaques, and a very thorough biography. The writers, Morecambe and Sterling, felt that Cary Grant was the greatest leading man Hollywood had ever known. Alfred Hitchcock, who was not known to be very sentimental, said of Grant, "He was the only actor I ever loved." Please do look into his films. He will charm you, he will make you laugh, and somehow he will still seem like a guy who you could be friends with. That's just his charm. He's one of my favorite actors of all time, as I said at the beginning, and someone I am glad to have been able to research for Time Traveler 1930s. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your patience as I got through mountains and mountains. I'm still working through mountains and mountains of just lots and lots of bad luck. I don't know what else to call it. A curse? I don't know. My family's been through the ringer, and so many things have happened that it's just taken my focus off of everything else. And I'm glad that everyone has been so loving and sending prayers and whatnot my way, good energy. I need it all. My family needs it all. We appreciate it. And I'm appreciative of your patience and the fact that hopefully you will still watch this episode, even though it has been several weeks since I posted. I'm really grateful for you guys, for my little tiny community that I hope will still grow. Until next time, I hope that you are happy, safe, and healthy, and that you have a beautiful day.